Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Bench Boss Podcast. My name is Matt, and I'll be the bench boss for today. That doesn't sound corny at all, but we're going to roll with it. First off, we're going to talk about the Erik Karlsson and the Max Pacioretty trades, the Tyler Seguin signing, the suspensions going on this offseason, and then a Pacific Division preview. Now, we're going to start off with the Erik Karlsson trade, because this has to be the biggest story of the summer. We knew something was going to happen at the end of the season when Erik Karlsson picked up that puck in the last game. And we didn't know at the time what had happened. We knew that contract negotiations weren't going well. And as the summer went along, we find out more about what was happening with the Hoffman situation, with the girlfriend making comments about Karlsson and his wife. And we knew something was going to happen. And what ended up happening was Hoffman got traded. And I don't know if Ottawa was going to do anything about it at first, because it seems that nothing happened until Karlsson made the comments public. Once everything became public, Ottawa was very quick to start making moves, and Hoffman was dealt. Now, Karlsson still didn't want to sign there, and I don't really blame him. I won't talk much about that because it's not my place. But what ended up happening was a long summer of, are you going to get traded? When are you going to get traded? Are you going to sign here? It wasn't until a week and a half ago that Karlsson ended up getting traded. And I'm not sure if the trade is amazing for Ottawa, because really the best player in that whole pickup is Chris Tierney. And San Jose fans are high on him, but you're not really getting back a star quality or star caliber player like an Erik Karlsson. Karlsson is, when he's healthy, the best defenseman in the NHL next to Drew Doughty and Victor Hedman. So, I mean, he's a very high profile player, and the return, when you're looking at it, it doesn't really scream good a trade. It kind of reminds me of when the Boston Bruins traded Tyler Seguin or Joe Thornton, and both of those trades were just left fans devastated because they were trading away a superstar player and really didn't get much of a haul back, and after a while, all of those players were gone. So I don't know if this is a similar situation with Ottawa, where I'm looking at these players, Josh Norris, Dylan DeMello, Rudolph Balcers, Chris Tierney. How many of them are going to stick with the team after a couple seasons? You don't know. You don't know how much of an impact they're going to have on Ottawa. They're rebuilding right now. And it kind of makes you question what Ottawa's doing with their management. It's got to be uncomfortable as an Ottawa Senators fan, knowing that your franchise player's gone. They treated him poorly in the situation that he was in. And you've had issues filling up stadiums. It's hard to get to the games. Even when Ottawa was in our Eastern Conference Finals, they weren't selling out games. So this kind of makes you a little nervous about what's going on with Ottawa right now. For San Jose, wow. I mean, they're the envy of the league right now. They have Erik Karlsson and Brent Burns. That power play is just star-studded. I don't even know what to say about that. You don't even need to be an hockey analyst to say they're probably going to have a top 5 power play unit. Their defense is probably going to be leading the NHL in scoring this year for just defensive cores alone. Like, they might give Nashville a run for their money. That's a premier trade for San Jose, and it's a needed trade because I know San Jose was really looking to try to get John Tavares. Joe Thornton, this might be his last year, and they really need another cornerstone player. The interesting thing is Karlsson only has this year, and then he's going to be looking for another contract. So the big question now is, can San Jose sign him to a deal? And it looks like they've been effective with getting players to sign deals recently. I mean, if we look at it right now, San Jose's signed Evander Kane, Tomas Hertl, Logan Couture. Obviously, Thornton got that next year. So they haven't really had issues signing players. They do have to get Pavelski signed soon, but I think they're in a very good spot, and their Stanley Cup window is right now. For the trade impact, who wins now? Who wins in the future? That's tough to say. I think San Jose clearly wins now. they got the best defenseman in the NHL when healthy. And they're going to make a serious run at the Stanley Cup this year. For the future, if San Jose signs Karlsson, because I don't see them trading Karlsson at the deadline if they can't reach a deal. Because if you have Karlsson, you kind of need to go for the Stanley Cup if you're in that position. If something tragic happens and San Jose's not in a good position and they trade him, then maybe. But I just don't see that as a reality, because even without Karlsson, they still gave Vegas a good series last year in the playoffs. I don't really know what to say about the futures. If San Jose can sign Karlsson, then they're going to be in a great spot. He's probably going to be close to 10 mil a season, and if they can fit him, great. They're going to have a solid decor. Their defense looks amazing this year, so this is just a cherry on top for them. For the future for Ottawa, I'm looking at these players, and I don't know who's going to stick out. I don't really know most of the names. I know Dylan DeMello. I know Chris Tierney. They're not cornerstone players. They're great players to have for your team, but I don't want to insult them by saying they're not great players, but they're not like Erik and Karlsson tier. So I just don't really know what Ottawa's going to be looking at in their future with that. So honestly, I have to say San Jose wins now and in the future. I think this is a one-sided trade for them, and I think they've won it. Next up is the Max Pacioretty trade, which is another trade that was filled with drama. Montreal had such a difficult season last year, and I don't even know where it starts, to be honest with you. Weber was injured. Pacioretty wasn't playing well. Julian's first year as coach. They don't have Radulov there. They make a huge trade last season, and they have Jonathan Drouin as their main center. They're not giving Galchenyuk the center duties. Drouin hasn't played center in the NHL, and their offense is just off to a really shaky start. Price was injured. Price wasn't playing well. I mean, Montreal's defense was terrible. They couldn't clear the puck out of their own end. How are you going to get your forwards the puck when you can't really clear your own end? Also, face-offs. There wasn't a good face-off man for the team, so they were repeatedly losing puck possession the whole time, and it's tough for a player like Pacioretty to get points when, your team either doesn't have the puck or you're fighting in your own end the whole time. It's a tough situation in Montreal because their fans are so passionate, and you have a lot of losses racking up. Players aren't playing up to their contracts, and someone wants something to happen. I don't know if the right things happened because Bergevin has a strong history of making terrible trades. Before the summer, I really couldn't list a trade that I think has gone well for them. I do think the Pacioretty trade is a fair trade for both sides, but before that, wow, the Subban trade, terrible. The Drouin trade, I just don't see that being a victory for Montreal right now. I think Sergachev's going to be a fantastic defenseman for Tampa Bay. Not saying Drouin's not a great player, because he is, but it's going to take him some time. They also traded Galchenyuk away for Domi. It's kind of rough, but I do think this trade was decent. But I'll get back to the story of the trade itself, because everyone's asking Max Pacioretty, how do you feel? Are you going to get traded right now? What's going on? And he doesn't know. He doesn't know what's going on. I think behind the scenes, he was done with that place. You have so much drama going on. They've lost coaches. Their fans are going nuts. If you look at the team roster now compared to 4 years ago even, it's almost completely different. Identities are gone. How do you know where you're going when you feel like you have no direction? And unfortunately, he was the captain. He's at the forefront. He's used to getting 30-plus goals each year for the past almost 5 years, and he's only got 18 at the end of the season. It's tough. Everyone knew he was going to get traded. He knew he was going to get traded. Where was he going to go? Would Montreal get fleeced again? And, I don't think they get fleeced in this situation. Vegas gets Max Pacioretty, Montreal gets Tomas Tatar, Nick Suzuki, and a 2019 second-round pick. I see this being a win for both teams. I think Pacioretty signing in Vegas helps that because now he's guaranteed the 4 years there. He wants to play there. He has a friend in Stastny. I think Vegas is loaded now. But you look at Montreal, Tomas Tatar has played pretty well this preseason, and I think he might do okay in Julian's system. Nick Suzuki's a center prospect. I know they couldn't get Glass, but you're not going to always win the best parts of every trade. I think Nick Suzuki's a great prize for that. And a second-round pick, you can never have enough draft picks. It's going to be tough to see who plays center now in Montreal because basically they have Max Domi, who said he was going to try to play, and then you have Jonathan Drouin. Their top winger now is a Gallagher. I mean, you don't have Pacioretty there to be your premier goal scorer. It kind of makes you think about the draft now because they passed up on Zadina, who would have been a great scoring threat, and you don't have Pacioretty there, so you really don't have a premier top-line winger. Zadina could have been that top-line winger, and now you have Tomas Tatar as your top winger and Brendan Gallagher. I don't know. I just don't see that threat. Obviously, they could have a great system this year. Everyone buys into Julian's system. They start scoring goals. They focus on team defense and build off of turnovers and try to capitalize. But you need that talent to score. I'm sorry. It's difficult. You have Kotkaniemi, who is going to take some time to come up. Knowing Julian's track record, I don't see him bringing a rookie in this fast to try to make a difference and contribute on offense. Even when he did, he brought in Tyler Seguin years ago. Seguin didn't have a super freshman season just because, Boston was very stacked. It was a responsible organization, and they had the talent. You bring in a player like that now, I think Julian's still going to monitor his minutes, and I don't think he's going to be able to be that premier scorer. And I don't think anyone was thinking Kotkaniemi is going to be that premier scorer either. So it's just a questionable offseason for Montreal. I do think they got decent prospects and player for Pacioretty, but I don't know. I think who wins now? Vegas. Vegas absolutely wins now. They're getting a proven 30 goal scorer, almost 40. He got 39 goals. I'm not going to be one of those guys like, oh, he hasn't got 40 goals. But this is definitely his chance. I think Vegas is lined up now. They're lined up for the future. You don't know how good Tatar is going to be for them. You don't know how good Suzuki's going to turn out to be. He's promising. He has great numbers in juniors. So we'll have to see how that pans out. And it's interesting because these two big trades kind of overshadow the Tavares signing. Which one's the biggest move of the summer? I got to be honest with you. I think Erik Karlsson's trade is the biggest one, followed by the Tavares signing. That's kind of shocking, but Pacioretty's right up there. He's captain of Montreal, one of the most storied organizations in sports. So next up we have the contract extension to Tyler Seguin, who signed an 8-year, nearly $10 million per season contract. And that's huge for Dallas. That's really huge because they've been expected to go deep into the playoffs. They've been expected to make the playoffs first and foremost, but it hasn't really fallen into place with them recently. They had that one season a few years back where Ben and Seguin just ripped apart the league and they won the Western Conference and were supposed to go very far in the playoffs, and they didn't. And then ever since then, it's just been lackluster for fans. You have Seguin and Ben continuously putting up big numbers, but are they surrounded with the right people? I think slowly it's been starting to fill out. They signed Radulov last season. He had a great season. He only had about 54 points for Montreal, and he broke the 70-point barrier for Dallas real fast. I mean, that was a great move. They got Ben Bishop. If Bishop wasn't injured last season, I do think Dallas would have made the playoffs because they had a very tough stretch near the end, and they proved that they couldn't win with Niemi in the past. And with Kari Lehtinen and Antti Niemi, they weren't really doing well. And when Bishop got injured, you're leaning on Lehtinen. It's not really going well for them. They choke. So this season, I think with the signing of Khudobin, that's going to help out Bishop a lot. Bishop is known to get injured, and there was a report, I was reading something like this a couple months back. It was an article, I think it was on TSN. They were saying that Bishop's legs were too small for him almost, he's too big for his legs, and he's just prone to injury. I don't know what that was. I don't know if I buy into that, but I do know he does get injured pretty frequently, so you need to have someone be able to support his workload. You don't want Bishop, or any goalie really, to be playing for 70-plus games. Hudobin did great with Boston last season. He had a great rebound year because the year before that he struggled mightily in his first season back with Boston. And the years before that with Carolina and Anaheim. He did very well for Boston in 2012, 2013. Between that and last season, it was kind of lackluster. If he can continue that play, Dallas stands to be in good position goaltending-wise. Bishop and Hudobin should be a strong 1-2 punch. But what else is Dallas doing to surround Seguin and Ben with talent? Well, they have Heiskanen coming up, which was a godsend for Dallas fans to get that pick years ago. And now he's coming in. He's had a pretty good preseason so far. I can't say why not. Why couldn't he come up and play? They have a new coach. They have several players coming up that, you're getting a little excited for. Heiskanen, obviously, number one. Nichushkin, can he come back and actually make a difference with Dallas? He had a rough going of it with Ruff. So that wasn't meant to be a pun. I'm going to beat myself up for that. That's terrible. But he went back to Russia, and you don't know what you're going to get. Well, he comes back now. There's a new coach. There's a little more scoring depth with Radulov being there. Maybe he becomes friendly with Radulov. It might help him come out of his comfort zone a little bit and try a little harder. I know there was a question about his work ethic, but maybe he decides to dig in now, and maybe his potential can be reached, because he is a talented guy. It's going to take some time for Dallas. I really don't see them being a Stanley Cup contender right now. When you have players like Spezza, Methot, Polak, and Hansel there, Spezza's past the point of his contract. If they sign him, he's 35. If they sign him for like $3 million, maybe that's okay. But you have Mark Methot, his salary is going to be coming off the books. You have Roman Polak. I feel like the guy's 50 years old, but he's only 32. I see him all the time between Toronto and San Jose. I just can't take the guy seriously. If he's on your team, I think that just means you're not going to be winning the Stanley Cup anytime soon. And then you have Hansel, who was like the biggest talk of the trade deadline a couple of years back from Minnesota and was kind of a bust almost. So where does Dallas go from here? Well, I think you wait for some of those contracts to go up. Spezza and Methot are almost off. Polak's almost off as well. Hansel's got a couple of years left, and you have some promising young talent coming up. I think the future is bright for Dallas. I do think they're going to need some secondary scoring, and if Klingberg and Heiskanen can develop into that really top defense unit, then I think they're going to be fine. It's just going to take some time, and the Western Conference is crowded. They're going to have to compete with Winnipeg, Vegas, San Jose now, Nashville. It's going to be tough, but I think they can do it. So I wanted to get into suspensions. It's been pretty interesting this offseason. I want to start off with Max Domi. He was suspended for the rest of the preseason in an incident with Ekblad, where they were playing in a game. Ekblad's skating up the ice. Florida has the puck. Ekblad doesn't have the puck, but he's skating following his team. And Domi's on the guy. He's grasping his jersey. He's not letting him go. And he's just yelling at him. And Ekblad turns around and he's like looking at the refs, looking at the linesman, asking, what are you doing about this? And then out of nowhere, Domi just smashes him in the face and the play is stopped. And then as Ekblad is falling onto the ice, Domi sneaks in a couple more punches on him. What is the thought process here? Honestly, it reminds me of a couple bad incidents that I'll get into. The most recent one, it kind of reminds me of when Sean Thornton punched Brooks Orpik. It wasn't as vicious as that, but it was still terrible. And what's the consequence? Ekblad breaks his nose out for the rest of the game. That's a big hit. And Ekblad has concussion history. Ekblad is supposed to be the future of Florida. Florida hasn't been great in previous years. Well, to be honest with you, they haven't been that great ever. Only for a handful of seasons. Literally a handful of seasons they've been great. Ekblad's that number one guy, and honestly, he's supposed to be a perennial Norris Trophy candidate once he hits his prime. And I totally see him making that leap. It's just going to take a couple of years. And what slowed him down was the concussion issue when he was hurt. But you have a thing like this where Domi hits Ekblad. He has concussion history issues. He's the face of the Panthers. You just can't really let that happen. That's terrible. Now, Domi was suspended for the rest of the preseason. That's a little light. I just don't see that really being enough. What if Ekblad was concussed? And I know it's based off of injury, so if Ekblad was concussed, he would have been stopped and the suspension would have been more. But it's the thought. Domi said he didn't intend to injure Ekblad. What were you doing? You giving him a hug? Clearly he was trying to injure him. I don't get why he was so mad. He needs to control that temper. I think it's very important when you have passion in the game of hockey, but you can't go around and just smash someone like that. That's terrible. And the worst thing is, he just got traded from Arizona. He has a lot of pressure on him. He wasn't having a good couple seasons with Arizona. This is his chance to rebuild his career and be someone that he wants to be. I remember when he was getting drafted and they interviewed Ty Domi and they're like, "Oh, Ty, what do you think about your son?" He goes, "Oh, he's nothing like me. He's a great goal scorer, great playmaker, he's fast, he's got a great mind for the game." And I was interested in that. He goes, "But he still has my passion for the game." I was like, that's awesome. You want a forward like that. You want a tenacious forward that's going to get in the corners, scrap for the puck, create plays, be that leader in your dressing room, give your teammates courage. He has that potential. And it wasn't going on well in Arizona. For obvious reasons, Arizona hasn't been that great. They haven't had great leadership in the past couple of years, and they haven't been successful. You go to an organization like Montreal, it's a holy land there. Montreal Canadian hockey is the biggest thing in Montreal. You have to rebuild there. That's a lot of pressure. And I don't think this is good for him. I don't think this is a good message to send to your teammates. You know, your teammates are looking for you. You have the chance to be the number 1 or number 2 center in Montreal. You have Jonathan Drouin, who's playing center right now, but he's a natural winger. If Domi could play center instead, you could move Drouin to wing. That's what his potential could have been. If it worked out, he could have actually been on first-line center role. But I don't know how this makes him look to his teammates. I don't know what Julian's thinking. I don't know what his teammates are thinking. I don't know what he's thinking. I think he feels bad. But I think it's bad for him. It's going to put a target on his back. He's going to become a villain now, especially against Florida. Oh, Ekblad came out and said, we'll see what happens in the preseason. I mean, in the regular season, rather. He's going to go after him. He's going to get jumped when he plays Florida. It's not even a question. It's not even going to be like, hey, I'll fight you at center ice thing. Even after they fight, he's going to get leveled every moment he's on the ice. And now that reputation is going to stick with him. There are players out there who either continuously carry on that bad reputation and it just drags on to them. And I hate to say this, but Marchand always gets in trouble for it. Marchand's a superstar player. And don't tell me he's not. He really is. You have to see him play. The numbers he puts up are incredible, all 3 zones. But I can talk about him for a while. But that reputation sticks. Even when you clean your game up and you start putting together fantastic campaigns, it still sticks. So I just don't know how this is going to affect Max Domi's career. Can he clean it up? Does he want to clean it up? Does Montreal want him to clean it up? Those are 3 things he has to think about. And I don't think it's just bad for him. I think it's bad for the game of hockey. You know, hockey's had a few incidents in the past that kind of stick out in people's minds. You have the Todd Bertuzzi incident with the sucker punch. You have the Marty McSorley incident on Brashear, where he smashed him in the back of the head with the stick to fight him. You have Aaron Rome's hit on Nathan Horton in the Stanley Cup Finals. Several Scott Stevens hits. You have the Chris Pronger and the Chris Simon incidents. Those are separate, but they both stepped on people with their skates. You have Burroughs biting, Matt Cook's hit on Vinny Lecavalier and Marc Savard. And you have the antics of Marchand recently. Those news incidents, those are the ones that get covered. If you have like a 10-1 win, sometimes that's not covered by every single station. You have channels like SportsCenter out there who just never talk about hockey unless something incredible happens. So if nothing happens and then this story comes out of a sucker punch to a random fan that isn't really familiar with hockey, they're just going to look at it and be like, oh, what is this? This is ridiculous. So I don't really know if I like that. I'm not really sure how the NHL is going to look at that, but clearly I don't know what's going on in the NHL's mind because they only banned him for the rest of the preseason. With something like that, I really think you got to go into the regular season. If it was the rest of the preseason and then a 5-game suspension for the regular season, that could be big. And I know he has no suspension history, and I know he doesn't have a huge history of fines. But is that acceptable? If you sucker punch somebody and you have no history, still, that's a crime. If in real life, if you do something bad and you commit a crime, you're still going to face the law and be penalized for it. So why not in the NHL? So I disagree with that suspension. The next suspension I want to talk about is the Nate Schmidt suspension. He was suspended 20 games for PED, performance enhancing substance. But the amount that was found in him was 7 billionths of a milligram. And it was provided to him from his own Vegas Golden Knights training staff. So this is confusing. He got 20 games. 20 games for 7 billionths of a milligram, which they were saying was like pouring a little bit of salt in a swimming pool, an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's nuts. 20 games for that. I think that's overboard. If you think about this right now. You have Max Domi, who just punched a superstar player in the face, broke his nose. He looks terrible. Look at his picture on Twitter. His face is all swollen. There's blood on the ice. It's all over the news. You have Nate Schmidt, who really came out on his own last year to become a premier player for the Vegas Knights. And he causes no issues at all. And the suspension, boom, 20 games. And it's making him look like Lance Armstrong. They're going to remove all of his trophies, basically. I totally disagree with that. I think there needs to be a little bit more protocol in the NHL. Maybe the NHL becomes harsh on teams. His own team gave him the substance. So could the NHL say, hey, you can't be giving your players this. We're not going to suspend the player. We're going to fine you guys. I think they could have fined the Knights, but I don't think they should have suspended Schmidt. It's not like he knew that this stuff was illegal or not. So I completely disagree with the suspension. I don't think he should be suspended at all. I think it should just be a fine to the Vegas Golden Knights, if that's what it is, because I think as an organization, you need to be able to be held accountable for what you're giving your players for treatment. And this kind of goes back to when Nicklas Backstrom was suspended in the Olympics. I don't know if any of you remember this 2014 Olympics. It was I think it was the gold medal game, right? It was Sweden versus Canada, and Backstrom's their number one center, and they said he's not playing. And the reason was he took Zyrtec D for allergies, prescription allergy relief, and he was tested positive for whatever substance was in Zyrtec D, and they're like, nope, you can't. You can't play at the highest level of hockey, the world stage, because you took Zyrtec. What if you have heartburn? I just don't get it. I think the suspensions for this are ridiculous. I don't know if it's the MLB effect, because they've had so many players on steroids and it's gone to the Senate. I mean, it's not just like a league thing. That stuff was going to the House, Supreme Court. I mean, huge. I don't think the NHL would ever get to that point, but clearly there's a huge difference between proven steroid injections, a huge crime ring belonging to it, and Zyrtec, the allergy pill, and whatever Nate Schmidt was taking. Now, what happens in this regard? You have Schmidt that's out a quarter of the season. He was their top pairing defenseman. Who fills in for him? Now it's looking like Colin Miller. I think they wanted to get Erik Karlsson. That would have been a great replacement, but They miss out on that deal. San Jose gets him. I think this is Colin Miller's chance to prove who he is. He's a standout for the Manchester Monarchs when he was with the LA Kings. He comes to Boston, showed flashes of brilliance in Boston, excellent skater, great hitter, beautiful shot, great passer, but he was in Claude Julien's doghouse while he was in Boston. He goes to Vegas, flourishes, point every other game player, power play player. If you had to take a positive out of this suspension, I really think that Colin Miller could become that player he was projected to be, a top pairing defenseman. If not, it's going to give him a lot of experience, and Vegas will be better off for it. You just hope that this doesn't really trip Vegas up when they've made great strides. Their offense is going to be there, but can Colin Miller play against those top players every night? Play on the penalty kill? His duties are going to change. I don't know if he'll be on the penalty kill, but it just depends on what his role will be. Now, the third suspension I wanted to talk about was the Austin Watson suspension. That one was 27 games for a misdemeanor domestic abuse. Do I agree with the suspension? Yeah. That's horrible. Allegedly, according to the Tennessean, he was arrested in June after striking his girlfriend outside of a gas station. He was released on $4,500 bail, sentenced to 3 months probation, including an inpatient program for 26 weeks for alcohol and substance abuse. I agree with the suspension completely. Now, that's 7 more games than what Schmidt was given, and I think his crime was an actual crime, and I think it was terrible. That's terrible for the league. That's terrible for any person. You should not be harming your girlfriend. You shouldn't be harming anyone, really. So I think the NHL got this one right. Now, how does this impact Nashville? Watson really came out last year. He was a great bottom 6 role player. He had 14 goals as a bottom 6 player. Wow. That's huge. And he had 8 points in 13 playoff games. And I remember while I was watching the Colorado-Nashville series, when Nashville's top 6 forwards weren't really doing it compared to Colorado's top 6 forwards, they really relied on their bottom 6. And Watson proved it. He was one of their leading scorers in that first round. He also helped their penalty killing unit. They're the 6th best penalty killers in the regular season and the 4th best in the playoffs. You're losing someone like that for a third of the season. That's detrimental. I don't know who's going to fill his place, but that's really tough. That's really tough to overcome. So I want to spend some time now previewing teams from each division. I figure I'll go in alphabetical order. So let's start off with Anaheim. Last season, Anaheim lost in a 4-game sweep to San Jose. It was apparent that their offense was kind of lacking. They looked tired. They looked out of it. And we were wondering if San Jose was playing that well or if it was just Anaheim themselves. And I think that was answered in the next series when Vegas came in and just lit San Jose up, especially that first game. I mean, it was a steamroll. So when you're looking back at Anaheim, and they say, okay, we had a good season. We broke the 100-point plateau. It's kind of hard to tell where you measure that team. They started off extremely injured. I think they're the most injured team in the NHL with the most man games lost out of any team in the league. And at the deadline, Bob Murray said, I'm not going to be adding anything to this team at the deadline because they haven't proved to me that they can win in the playoffs. And what happened was some players came back and they started playing very well. And they ended up breaking the 100-point barrier, getting into the middle of the pack in the Western Conference, and just saying, okay, we're here. Well, I don't know if those injuries mounted up, and I don't know if they were tired after playing that well, but they kind of fell flat in the playoffs. 2 things to note about last season were the emergence of John Gibson. I think he had a fantastic season. If he wasn't injured, you might have seen him as a Vezina candidate at the end. And Rickard Rakell. Actually, I also want to include Andre Kasha. I think he and Rakell really helped this team get some secondary scoring and primary scoring when Getzlaf was injured. And Kessler was injured. Can't forget about that. Also, one of the things is their D-core has been fantastic. If you look at them on paper, their top 4 is one of the best in the NHL. They're intimidating, they can move the puck well, and they can get points. And none of them really have an egregious contract. So Anaheim's pretty set defensively for a while. At the end of the season, Anaheim signed John Gibson to an 8-year, $51 million deal. I think that's fantastic for them. They don't have a lot of money locked in with him compared to like a Carey Price or something like that, and that just opens them up to a very strong future defensively and goaltending-wise. Now, before the season starts, they haven't even won a preseason game. And the issue there, I know it's preseason, but they've been outscored 17-5. I mean, they can't score a goal. So is that some sort of foreshadowing this year, or is that just players kind of finding their feet and trying to make the team? You don't know. But that is something to note. And I'm only noting it because they've had difficulty scoring. They only had 2 people last season with above 50 points. So when you look at Anaheim, you really want some goal scoring. And if I'm a fan of Anaheim right now, I'm a little nervous looking at the scores of these games. Some of the big questions to ask right now about Anaheim is, this is the most redundant question in that team's franchise history, but is this the last year of Corey Perry and Ryan Getzlaf? Both are 33, both are making over $8 million per season, and they both have full no movement clauses. I don't know if you get rid of either of them. If you're going to get rid of one, it would be Corey Perry. I don't think you should ever trade Ryan Getzlaf. He's still averaged over a point per game last season, and I think the pace of the NHL this year and in the coming years, just how everything's getting quicker, more skill involved, he's valuable because he's that huge center that you can't take off the puck, but he also has that transition game, and he's so crafty. I think he matches both the past NHL and today's NHL. The question is Corey Perry. Do you trade him? A lot of people want him gone, and a lot of people want him to stay. He's big in the locker room. He's popular with his teammates. But what happened? I just don't know what happened with him. He was the perennial goal scorer. I mean, premier for the league. He scored 50 goals, won the MVP, 30 goals plus several times, and out of nowhere, it's just been a slump. And I don't know if it's a coaching issue. Could it be that Randy Carlyle's system is not suited for today's NHL? Maybe they need more of an up-tempo coach, someone that can really work with that defensive core that they have and say, okay, you guys are great at transitioning the puck. We need some guys up front that can really cash in here. I don't know. Possession-wise, you can't take the puck off the team. But how effective are they in the other end? And it doesn't seem like it. We already noted earlier that only 2 players had above 50 points last year. They did have a lot of injuries, so you wonder if this is the year that's kind of putting Randy Carlyle on the hot seat again with Anaheim, saying, okay, if the guys aren't injured this year, if we can put together a good campaign, how far are we getting? Because the year before that, they made it to the Western Conference Finals with Randy Carlyle. So it's hard to say. This year will definitely be the average season between last year and the year before that. And I'm not saying last year was a failure either, but compared to the year before, you had expectations. The bigger question is, what's going on with Ryan Kesler? At the beginning of the offseason, they said Kesler had the chance to miss the entire season while he was healing from the hip surgery. But today, they came out with an article saying Ryan Kesler was cleared for contact and he'd be out there with his teammates. That's a huge development. I mean, if he can play, that is huge for that team. Penalty killing wise, secondary scoring wise, leadership wise. I mean, he's so invaluable to the team. You need him out there. Is he healthy? Who knows? If he plays too early, is he going to risk getting injured even further? I question if he'd be 100% this season, but I think having him out there is better than not. It might be wise to rest him a bit. Who knows? Moving on to Arizona. Last season they missed the playoffs badly, but it was a tale of 2 teams, really. They started off the season on an impossible run of losing. I mean, people thought they were going to be worse than Colorado was last year. And they finally started to string together some wins. The team put together a little bit of an effort, and they were like getting overtime wins and overtime losses. Those were victories for them. But towards the end of the season, they started to put together a few wins. They had some winning streaks, and numbers would show that if they kept that up, who knows if they even make the playoffs one year. Some of the highlights of last season were Clayton Keller, clearly. If Matthew Barzal didn't have that monster season, you would have seen Keller take home the Calder. He's very crafty. He reminds people of Patrick Kane and Johnny Gaudreau with his shiftiness, his size, but his speed, his vision, his playmaking ability. He's got a bright future ahead of him, and hopefully this year he can continue that. The other surprise was Antti Ranta. I don't think people were expecting him to become a number one goaltender in the NHL that fast. Now, he had a .930 save percentage and a .224 goals against average. Both were second in the NHL for the Coyotes. That's fantastic. If he wasn't injured and he kept those numbers for another 20 games or so, you wonder if he would have been in the consideration for the Vezina also. During the offseason, they were very busy. Their biggest trade was probably sending Max Domi to the Montreal Canadiens for Alex Galchenyuk. I think Arizona wins that trade by a landslide. Galchenyuk's a proven 30-goal scorer where Domi was struggling. I don't think they handled Domi correctly, sending him back to juniors twice and then forcing him into a situation where there's really no structure. I don't think Arizona's had the best player structure over the past decade, and you've seen that with a lot of prospects not really getting remotely close to their ceiling. The next big trade was acquiring Marian Hossa. Obviously he retired, but don't overlook Oysterley and Hinostroza coming to the team. Both are pretty young. Hinostroza has more upside, but Oysterley is actually leading the team in points this offseason, so who knows what's going to happen there. I think the most important move was signing Oliver Ekman-Larsson to an 8-year, $66 million deal. He's hands down their cornerstone player. If you lose him, that team just has no hope aside from Clayton Keller. He's an established defenseman, potential superstar. I think his numbers are fantastic. He just gets thrown in every single situation, and it hurts his stats. As the team gets more balanced throughout the years, I think you'll really see him emerge as one of the premier defensemen in the NHL. They also signed Christian Dvorak to a 6-year, $26.7 million contract. Dvorak has a bright future. He hasn't wowed anyone with his numbers really, but he's on course to becoming that really good second-line player that I think they envisioned him becoming. And last but not least, they signed Michael Grabner to a 3-year, $10 million contract. I don't know what to think about that. Grabner is such a hit-or-miss player. I'm willing to bet last season was kind of an anomaly for him, although the game has opened up a bit. With his speed, he has that ability to score. He was playing great for the Rangers, but when he went to the Devils, it kind of tapered off, and he wasn't really that effective in the playoffs, given they were playing Tampa Bay, so no one was really effective against them, but still, I'm not really sure what he's going to add completely, unless he finds chemistry with Derek Stepan. This season, though, there's a little bit of light. In the preseason, they're 3-1. Clayton Keller, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and Oysterley are leading the team in points. Some of the big questions, though, and I think everyone's asking this, what are we going to expect from the younger players? You have Dylan Strome, who I feel terrible for the kid because he was drafted 3rd overall in one of the deepest draft classes you might look back at it and say in the history of the game. That was a very deep draft, and players were expecting him to put up godlike numbers, fans were, and he stumbled. He didn't have a good preseason. They sent him down to minors again. He didn't do good in the World Juniors. He came back up, didn't have a good preseason, plays in the AHL, doesn't totally stand out, and then he comes up and he starts getting some points. I'm not sure how you handle that. I think he's doing a good job staying cool under the pressure, but this is a big year for him. If he can put together, I want to say 40 to 50 points, I think that'll be a huge, huge success for him. Now fans might be rethinking this and saying, you know what, I don't think Strome's going to be the kid that's putting together 80 to 100 points a season. But if he can effectively reach a point where he's putting 50 to 60 points on the table, that's huge, and I think that'll be great for him. You have Christian Dvorak, Galchenyuk, Clayton Keller, and Chychrun. I want to talk about Chychrun for a little bit because he and McAvoy were expected to be 2 of the bigger defensive names in the draft, and they both have been. I think Chychrun was slowed down a bit with his injury, and this season you can look for him to be coming out a little bit. He's going to be huge on their power play. Their power play was terrible last year. I think they were 26th in the NHL with a 16% effectiveness on it. That's horrible. You're not going to win many games with that effectiveness. So if Chychrun can help out, manage the power play a little bit, and also take some time off of Ekman-Larsson's hands. I think Ekman-Larsson will play better, and that'll pay dividends for the whole entire team. Galchenyuk's interesting because he's a proven 30-goal scorer, and he was handled poorly in Montreal. There were stories about him having a drug issue. I don't know if I buy that. I do know that he has an incredible amount of talent, and if he gets the chance to play center, who knows what'll happen. I think he slates in at that second-line center position while they give him a chance. Stepan stays at number 1. He gets to play against teams, not the best combinations against him. That might open up his game a little bit, build some confidence. There's not much pressure in Arizona compared to Montreal. He could thrive there. The other question we have was, is Rick Tocchet really the right coach for Arizona? Is Rick Tocchet a good coach in general? He coached Tampa Bay a few years ago, and they were horrible. But when he was let go, Steven Stamkos came out and said that Rick Tocchet was so instrumental in making him become the superstar that he is today, and he just felt terrible about him getting fired. And I think he's had time to reflect on that as an assistant coach, and this season could be their chance to really make the... I don't know if they'll make the playoffs, to be honest. They were voted by the players to be that surprise team to make the playoffs, but I don't see it. I think a healthy goal for them is to get above 80 points. That would be a victory for them, in my opinion. I don't think they need any more top-end talent from draft picks, unless you can get Jack Hughes, but I think this team's too good to get Jack Hughes. I think that's more of a Colorado Avalanche thing due to the Ottawa Senators. Next up is Calgary. Last season, Calgary missed the playoffs to the surprise of many. I think going into the season, you looked at Calgary's defensive core and said, wow, that is a top 5 D core in the NHL by a mile. You had Giordano, Brody, Hamilton, Hamonic, Stone, and you just look at that and you're like, all right, power play is going to be unreal. Penalty kill is going to be unreal. Their transition game is going to be fantastic. They should be good in their own end. They've got grit. They've got talent. And that team kind of imploded on itself. Gulletson got the axe for it, and the only person that really performed very well was Johnny Gaudreau. Gaudreau had a great season, over a point per game again. I think he's reaching the point where he's going to be entering his prime now. He might be putting up Patrick Kane numbers from a few years ago. This is a great time for Calgary and a great time for Johnny Gaudreau. But you need to surround him with the right amount of talent, and you need to kind of capitalize on this. Monahan has to step up. He and Gaudreau were the only ones to average over 50 points last season on a team that was kind of stacked for talent. Tkachuk was close. You can say he had 50. I think he had 49 points, so we'll give him up there. But this preseason, they're 2-2-2. Dylan Dube's having a great preseason, and so is Tkachuk. They're both leading the team in scoring. Can he make the roster? Who knows? Why not? I think he's playing it well enough. They've got a lot of young talent. The biggest questions for this season is Bill Peters the right guy for the job? He was their biggest transaction, really. Getting rid of Gulletson. Peters actually did pretty well for Carolina. I know Carolina didn't make the playoffs and people criticized him, but if you look back at it, Bill Peters has always been a coach internationally for Team Canada. Whether it's Olympic level or juniors or during the World Championships, he's always there. Clearly his mind is trusted. Carolina's always been top 5 in the NHL for possession stats. When you look randomly in the middle of the season, it's like, oh, the Kings, the Bruins, the Predators, and then randomly it's Carolina. And you're like, but they don't have any good players. If they can have that good possession with such little talent, you wonder what Bill Peters can do with the talent that Calgary has. Coming along with him this offseason was Elias Lindholm and Noah Hannafin. They were included in the Hamilton and Furlan trade. I think that's great. When I saw Hamilton get traded from Boston, I wondered if it was because Julian was coach, and players said he didn't fit in with the team, not many people liked him. That's like the stereotype conversation everyone says when a star player's traded. Oh, he didn't fit in the locker room. But now he's been traded again from Calgary. And it's kind of the same conversation going on. He's not physical in front of the net. He's not as effective as you want him to be. Offensively, he's great. One of the better players in the league defensively, or one of the better defensive players in the offensive end. But is he sort of a cancer in the locker room? Who knows? I think Noah Hannafin has a lot more upside to him. He's younger. He's a way better skater. Talent-wise, they could pan out to be equal in their primes. And he's a left-handed shot instead of a right-handed shot, so you get a little more freedom to move players around. They then signed Hannafin to a 6-year, $29.7 million deal. That's great for him. I think this is going to be a huge time for him to prove he's worth that contract and establish himself as one of the better younger defensemen in the NHL. The last major deal that Calgary had was they signed James Neal to a 5-year, $28.75 million deal. I don't know how I feel about that, because Neal had a great first 3 quarters of the season for Vegas, and then he kind of petered off there, and he wasn't that effective goal scorer you wanted him to be in the playoffs. They really could have used his help getting goals against the Capitals, and I'm going to exclude the LA Kings series there because both goalies played unreal. I just feel like anyone who scored a goal that series was like a superhero. So I'm not sure how he's going to fit in. I think he's going to be an added scoring threat and maybe helps the emergence of some of the younger players who can look to a veteran like him and say, okay, I'm taking too long to shoot the puck. I'm waiting a little too long to do anything. James Neal has a great release, so maybe he can kind of provide some guidance to the younger players. Can Bill Peters get this team to score more goals? We noted earlier, Gaudreau and Monahan were the only players to get above 50 points. You need to have more of that, especially when you're in that division. You have to capitalize on teams with poor defense. You have to light those teams up. Defensively, they don't have a lot going for them. Can the defense rebound? I mentioned earlier, many people thought they were going to have a top 5 defense last season, and they didn't. Now, whether this new combination with Hannafin helps out or not, I honestly think they're going to rebound. I think you're going to see them be top 10, maybe top 5 defense in the NHL. They have the names, they have the talent, and Bill Peters will help get them organized. So look forward to that. And the last question we have was, can Mike Smith stay healthy, and is he their number 1? I don't think so. Mike Smith has a lot of talent, but he is getting old. He's 36. This is the last year on his contract. I don't know if this is the end for him. I don't know if he has 3 years left. This will be an interesting season to see. If he doesn't get injured, I think that answers more questions for you. He can prove to stay healthy. He can make a playoff run with them. But with him getting injured last season, you had, I think it was Gillies and Riddick who were playing net, and they're letting in goals from Bermuda, for crying out loud. It wasn't that great. Some nights they'd be on, some nights they weren't. So does that kind of play into how their defense wasn't playing well? It could. They go hand in hand. If you have good defense, you're going to have good goaltending. If you have good goaltending, you're going to have pretty good defense. If he does get injured this season, I think a question that they really need to ask themselves is, all right, who are we going to get for a real goalie? Do you look at Vegas and you see all their goalie prospects and try to make a deal with them? That's an option. But for right now, they're going to stick with Mike Smith. We'll see what happens. He's a great goaltender, so if he does stay healthy and he gets a good, healthy workload, they don't just stick him in there for 70 games like Arizona used to do. Give him like 55, 65 games, see what happens. Next, I want to talk about the Edmonton Oilers. Last season was catastrophic for Edmonton, as I think many people realized they overachieved the year before, getting to play against Anaheim in the semifinals, but I don't think people expected them to miss the playoffs. They were said to be the Stanley Cup favorite. I didn't believe that. You look at the team, and if some of their younger players developed faster and could stick with McDavid on that first line, maybe, but a lot of things went wrong for that team. The highlight of last season for them was clearly McDavid. He had a monstrous season. 108 points. Most of his points were even strength. If you can fix that power play, he might break the 120-point barrier. And people are saying he's really in it this preseason. He's played one game and got 4 points in it. I believe him. He's improved his skating, which is, you wonder how you can improve on something that's already the best in the league, but that's why he's the best in the league. He keeps working at it. Major transactions, they had none. Peter Chiarelli decided to stay pat. When you look at Peter Chiarelli, you think terrible trades and terrible signings. And when I look at Peter Chiarelli's team, I see they have less than $1 million in cap space, and their decor looks terrible, and they've got a lot of money spent in 4 forwards. This season so far, they're 3-0 in the preseason. Ty Rattie is emerging as the potential winger for McDavid, as he's leading the entire preseason in points for the Western Conference. And that leads into our first big question for Edmonton, which is, will McDavid find line mates? I think fans were a little eager to get Pacioretty on his line. They saw him and they're like, okay, he's going to be like a line A kind of player. They both played great in World Juniors together. Why isn't he developing? He's taking his time. The kid has a ton of talent. It's just going to take more time for him to develop. He's a different player than line A. He's more of a playmaker. He's got a different mind for the game. I don't think he's a bust. I don't think he's going to be like a Ryan Strome either. I do think he's going to emerge as a good player. It's just going to take a few years. But how does his line look? Are they going to put Nugent Hopkins on his wing instead of having Nugent Hopkins at center? If their wingers actually develop, then you could go back to having McDavid as number 1, Draisaitl as number 2, and Nugent Hopkins as number 3. And you just align them with talent. You could put Puljujarvi and Rattie flanking McDavid. If that works out, that's fantastic, because your second line, you can put Lucic on there, maybe Ryan Strome, and then your third line, you can start to play more players. Maybe you give Kailer Yamamoto more of a chance on the third line where he has, less time against top-end talent. Give him confidence. How does Lucic come back? Everyone is just looking at that. I mean, the year before he had a great season for them, and last year he struggled mightily, and I felt terrible. I watched him here for Boston for years. He's one of my favorite players growing up, and you don't want to see him suffer. He's so strong. He's got that great personality. Everyone on the team loves him. Everyone on the other team fears him. He gives courage to your team. That's such an important player to have. And when people were saying, oh, trade him, it's terrible. No. You need to support a player like that. Sometimes the biggest guys need that much support. And he's lost weight this offseason. He's worked on his skating game tremendously. He's going to be there. I think he's going to improve this season. I don't think you're going to see him get 30, 40 goals. That's not realistic for him. But I do see him breaking the 20-goal plateau. One of the oddest things you see with this team is their special teams disaster. If you had Connor McDavid on your team, do you honestly think their power play would be last in the NHL with 14.8% effectiveness? No. But I think it makes sense. That team had no talent on it. If you could eliminate McDavid from the play and just double team him, and he's forced to do everything himself because there's no other power play quarterback there besides Draisaitl, then of course you're going to shut them down. And I think they got frustrated. That team had no confidence at all. They tried to force feed McDavid the puck. McDavid gets double teamed. McDavid gets frustrated. There's going to be a turnover at some point, and then he has to get off the ice. And who comes in for their second line unit? Nobody. And the big question with that is, you look at their defensive core, they really don't have a defensive quarterback that's going to run the power play. All the successful power plays in the NHL have that quarterback. You have Erik Karlsson, Brent Burns on the same team. Ridiculous. You have Torrey Krug. You have John Carlson, Chris Letang, Drew Doughty. I know you're not going to run into a superstar like this every once in a while, but when I look at the Oilers' defensive core, who's running that? Andre Sekera, I guess, was supposed to, but he's done for the season already. So who do you turn to? Oscar Klefbom? No. Adam Larson, the defensive specialist? No. Chris Russell, the shot blocker with a terrible plus-minus and Corsi stats? No. Darnell Nurse? Maybe. But I don't think people see Darnell Nurse and think 50 points a season. I think they see Darnell Nurse and they say, I'm not going in his corner. He's going to play great defensively. They need a power play specialist. If they want to help that team out, they need a power play specialist to work with McDavid, work with Draisaitl, work with Nugent-Hopkins. Because when you have a team that has only good forwards, the penalty killers are going to press, and they're not going to give much space to the forwards. They're going to leave the defensemen wide open and block off the passing lanes. And they're going to say, okay, you can shoot it. None of you have a great shot, and the goalie's going to make a save. Or they're just going to mess it up and get a turnover. Their penalty kill was 25th in the NHL with a 76% efficiency. That's also terrible. When you have a bottom 5 penalty kill and a bottom 5 power play, there's no chance of you making the playoffs. And I'm surprised they didn't have a good power play and penalty kill. When McClellan coached San Jose, they were lights out. But I really think it's players. I don't think he has enough talent on the D. But when you look at their defense, you see Russell, shot block champion of the world, Adam Larson, steady defenseman, Clefbaum, pretty steady defenseman, Nurse, very steady defenseman. That to me screams, I'm going to have at least an average middle of the pack penalty kill. And they didn't. Is Cam Talbot to blame for that? Maybe. Talbot had a rough season last year. But I think it goes hand in hand with the defense not being that good. They couldn't clear the puck at all. If they didn't just randomly give the puck to McDavid, their outlets were terrible. The puck was in their end most of the time each night. Do they tighten something up on defense and try to get things back? Who knows? But they need to give Cam Talbot a break. He's played so much, and you saw last season he's not going to be Superman each season. People are looking for him to rebound this year. I think he will. I think he definitely will. Why not? He's got great talent, and he's got the team in front of him. I don't know if there needs to be more of a defensive effort to help him. Who am I kidding? They definitely need more of a defensive effort. I don't know what I'm trying to get at there. But I think it starts with Chiarelli definitely needing to make a trade. And I think he's looking at his roster and saying, okay, my only trade bait is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Maybe, but their defense just does not look good enough. So moving on, we're going to be going over the LA Kings. Interesting season for the Kings. They had a great regular season last year. They even had a great playoffs, and they got swept by Vegas in 4 games. But that had to be the tightest playoff series I've ever seen. I don't know how that didn't go 7 games. Jonathan Quick was unbelievable that series. Unbelievable. Their defense was stellar. They just couldn't score on Vegas, and Vegas couldn't score on them. The other major stories were the resurgence of Dustin Brown. That came just in the nick of time. Jeff Carter was injured. They needed secondary scoring, and fans are looking at Dustin Brown saying, well, he's probably going to get 20 points this year. Let's trade him. No. In fact, he got a career high in points. Maybe this is going to be a trend. Maybe this continues. Maybe with Jeff Carter coming back healthy, the addition of Kovalchuk, maybe he keeps it going. Major transactions. Obviously, they signed Ilya Kovalchuk to a 3-year, $19 million contract. This preseason, they're 0-3-1 with Jeff Carter and Cale Clegg as their top scorers. I have never heard of Cale Clegg in my life. So, a left defenseman. All right. Great stats for the Brandon Wheat Kings. Almost 2 points per game as a defenseman. Maybe he's the guy that comes up and helps out. The biggest questions really are, can Kovalchuk realistically reach the 70-point plateau? If Kopitar has the season he had last year, he's playing with Kovalchuk, definitely going to break the 70-point plateau. Defensively, he's not great. Kopitar can finally be that center that he's never had, where he's going to be covered defensively. He has the freedom to kind of skate around a little bit. But I think with that responsibility being put on Kopitar, I don't see Kopitar breaking the 90 plateau barrier again. I really see him kind of getting 70 to 80 points, which isn't bad. That's not bad at all. I just don't see him having that MVP kind of year again. Selke, yeah, maybe. But I don't think he'll get that MVP year. The only way they're going to keep this up is if they can get Kopitar, Carter, and Brown to kind of reproduce their stats. Can Carter stay healthy? He had over a point per game last year in his quarter of the season played. If he is healthy, what does that mean for their younger players? Toffoli struggled. Kempe had his moments. And Iafallo had his moments. If Carter can stay healthy, they can play with him, create a balanced line. Maybe that helps them kind of their secondary scoring. So up next is the San Jose Sharks. And wow. I'll just put it out there. What an offseason for San Jose. Last season, they lost in 6 games to Vegas. They looked like world beaters when they crushed Anaheim. I really thought that series would have been another, deadlock scoring series where the games are 1-0, double overtimes. But no, Vegas blew them out of the water in certain games, and it was all offense. They had a great regular season, but it was halted by Vegas ultimately in the playoffs. Now let's talk about transactions. The first one, which you mentioned earlier, is the Erik Karlsson trade. Incredible. I look at that team right now, and I don't know if anyone has a better top 4 than them. Nashville's very close. I think Nashville probably has a better top 4 just because their second unit is better, but I don't think Nashville has a better bottom pairing than San Jose, so I'm just going to give this one to San Jose. I think San Jose has the best defense in the NHL. They signed Evander Kane to a 7-year, $49 million contract after he flourished there. He finally felt like a human instead of just I don't know. I don't think he was a fan favorite anywhere he went. I don't think the players liked him anywhere he went. This San Jose team opened up with arms wide open, and they said, hey, come over here. We're going to treat you well. Just enjoy yourself. And he did great. Signing him was a great move. Tomas Hertl signed 4 years, $22.5 million. Logan Couture was re-signed 8 years, $64 million. Thornton signed a 1-year, $5 million deal. And they restocked their draft picks by fleecing Ottawa and then fleecing Florida with the Mike Hoffman trade. This preseason, they're 2-0-1. Barclay Goodrow and Rourke Chartler are their leading scorers. The biggest questions immediately, are they the Stanley Cup favorites? I don't know. They're basically competing to win the West with Winnipeg, Nashville, Vegas. So I don't know who wins the West out of those 4. It's going to be fun to watch. I think those 4 teams will be playing each other in the semifinals. But San Jose definitely puts it together. If you have Erik Karlsson there and Brent Burns on the power play, that's ridiculous. It might be too much. Maybe they don't work well together, but I doubt it. They both kind of run the power plays usually. I think Erik Karlsson has a better mind for it, but who knows. Can they re-sign Karlsson? That is the big question, because he has this season left on his contract and then he's unrestricted free agent. He's going to be expecting to make 10 to 12 million per season on a max contract. And I don't know if San Jose can afford him because they also have to sign Joe Pavelski, who also has a year left. They also have some younger players to pay. This is Donskoy's last season, Gambrel's last season, Timo Meier's last season. They have a lot of work to do. And if Thornton decides to play again, they have to sign him again. Who is their secondary scoring? You have Tomas Hertl, Timo Meier, Jonas Donskoy, and Melker Karlsson. Honestly, that's not a bad secondary scoring group. I think San Jose is incredibly balanced. They should be considered Stanley Cup favorites, but it's going to be tough once it comes to the semifinals. If they don't make the semifinals at least, or the conference finals, that's going to be a failure for the team. And if they can't re-sign Karlsson and they don't win the cup this year, that's kind of disheartening. I think this is the year that they try to get it for Joe Thornton. This is probably Joe Thornton's last year. If they don't win a cup, is Peter DeBoer on the chopping block? I don't know how I feel about that. I remember back in Boston, Claude Julien was consistently on the chopping block, and they're like, he can't win a cup, he can't win a cup. They keep losing in the second round, and he finally delivered. We won the cup and went back to a Stanley Cup. I don't know if DeBoer is the next Claude Julien, where he just needs some stuff to go his way, but there's a lot of scenarios that could be broken down. They could re-sign Karlsson and then not win the cup this year, and then Wilson's going to look at him and say, Peter, I don't know what it is. I've stocked the talent pool for you. What's happening here? So that'll be interesting to find out, but I think he's safe for this season. Up next is the Vancouver Canucks. This is sad, but optimistic at the same time. Last season they missed the playoffs by a mile, but out of everything, I think the bright spot was clearly Brock Besser. Fans saw a little bit of him at the end of the season before last season, and he was scoring goals, and they're like, oh my god, he's going to light up the league. And he did. Who knows if he was going to give Matt Barzal a run for his money for the Calder if he didn't get injured. Almost had 30 goals. He would have definitely had 30 goals. Could he have had 40? I don't know. Maybe. He was developing a lot of chemistry with Bo Horvat, so that's something to look forward to. But I think one of the bittersweet moments was watching the Sedins retire. And the Sedins were their whole franchise for almost 2 decades. With them retiring, it kind of opens up several opportunities for the younger players to finally get premier power play time, first line time, more responsibility. And that opens up room for other young players to fill in for those young players. So it's a little bit of a pyramid effect, and that'll benefit this team. They have a lot of young talent coming up. I think a lot of people like to rag on Jim Benning. This preseason, they're 1-3. Bo Horvat and Sven Baertschi are their leading goal scorers. Some of the big questions are, does Thatcher Demko get a chance to play this season? I don't think their goaltenders are really it. Markstrom's got talent, but I think he's being viewed more of a bust now compared to before. People saw him and they're like, oh, he's going to be the next Roberto Luongo. Nope. I think Florida definitely ruined him. He played great for Utica, but I don't know if that translates to a good NHL career. That being said, their defense isn't really doing much to help him. I look at their D-core, no one really stands out for me. Tanev is probably their best defender. What does Vancouver do about Louis Eriksson? That is a disastrous signing. I think people were expecting him to be that 30-goal scorer that back in Dallas, back in that last season with Boston. But he's always injured. It looks like he's not trying because he doesn't show emotion. And it's very easy for him to be a target to the fans. And I don't know if he's the player that's going to help them with this rebuild. He needs to have a rebound season. If he doesn't, I'm thinking you need to bury his contract somehow. Get rid of him. Buy him out. I'm not sure. But he really needs to step up. He's been a complete disappointment for the 2 seasons he's been there so far. Now, along with Brock Besser and Bo Horvat are 2 other prospects that are getting everyone super excited, Juolevi and Pettersson. I think Juolevi's going to take some time, but he has the potential to be the next number 1 defender for this team. He could be that next power play guy. It's just going to take some time. This could be his season, or he could play in the AHL next season. Pettersson's the one everyone's really looking at here. He's a dynamo on offense. I watched some of his preseason highlights. His decision-making is unreal. Very quick to the puck, very quick with the puck, and very quick at getting rid of the puck. He takes defenders out of their position, and he moves that thing. That's going to be great. Eventually, you're going to have Pettersson and Besser on the same line, and that's going to be a great combination. The next question is, what can we expect from Brock Besser and Bo Horvat? I think Besser easily passes the 30-goal plateau this season, unless his injury is still nagging him. I don't think it will. Bo Horvat, I don't see him being that 70, 80 point producing center, but he's a great 2-way center. People say he's the minor version of Bergeron. Eventually he's going to get recognition for the Selke. It's just going to take a little bit of time. I think he'll get there. Up next we have the Vegas Golden Knights. Wow, what a team. Last season, they reached the Stanley Cup in their inaugural season, and no one saw that coming. Except people in Vegas, of course. They knew. I don't know how you replicate that season. The only way you can replicate that season is get better players and then do it again. They've done half of that, and we'll get into that soon. Last season, they also stocked up on draft picks and prospects. I think McPhee was looking at this opportunity as, okay, we're going to stockpile on a ton of first and second round picks, try to build the team through the draft. In 5 years, they could be a contender. What happened was they drafted really well during the NHL selection draft, not the regular draft, which they did select well, obviously, there too, with Glass and Suzuki. But they tore up the NHL. Karlsson, Smith, Marchessault, Neal, Perron all had great seasons. Nate Schmidt came out, played excellent. Theodore had his welcome party to the NHL. And everyone in Anaheim was excited to see Theodore. He was supposed to be one of their top 5, top 6 defensemen. But he's projected to be a number 1 or number 2 defenseman, and it's hard to protect a guy like that. I think they were fools for giving him up like that, but Vegas is enjoying that one. Major transactions. They signed Paul Stastny to a 3-year, $19.5 million deal. They signed Jonathan Marchessault to a 6-year, $30 million deal. They give William Karlsson the bridge deal of 1 year, $5.3 million. And that's interesting because, and I agree with it, he went from being a nobody to getting 40 goals. So where is he actually? If he scores 30 to 40 goals again this season and is great defensively like he was, he's going to get a huge contract. And I think he understands that as well. So I look forward to seeing him do that and getting that huge contract. I don't see why not. They signed Colin Miller to a 4-year, $15.5 million deal. That's great. Miller's got a lot of upside, and I think he's going to get a chance to play this year or play a higher role this year with Schmidt getting suspended. Marc-Andre Fleury was signed to 3 years, $21 million. He's the goalie of the future and the now right now. I know he's getting older, but these 3 years will give either Subban or Dansk a chance to emerge as that number 1 goalie in the future. The biggest story was traded for Max Pacioretty. They traded Tatar, Suzuki, and a 2019 second-round pick, and then they signed Pacioretty for 4 years at $28 million. This preseason, they're 4-0-0. They're completely obliterating every team they're playing against. Their leading scorers are Marchessault, Karlsson, Brandstrom, Smith, and Lindbergh. They all have 4 points or more. The biggest question, who replaces Schmidt on that first defensive pairing? It's got to be Colin Miller. Miller's got the skating ability, he's got the passing, he's got the shot, he's got the physicality. Sometimes his decision-making is a little off. You see him rush the puck up the ice on the clear, and you're like, this kid's brilliant. And then he hits the other team's blue line, and he just kind of stops and makes like a weird decision because I don't think he knows what to do. I think he's really good at carrying the puck, but I don't know if he has that person that he knows he's going to pass it to or play it around the boards or get a shot on net. There's a little bit of indecisiveness there, and I think he also gets a little lost in front of his own net. So if he can keep his cool and get his coverage down straight and stay focused under pressure during his clearing game, I do think he'll find some success there because he has the talent and the ability to play as a number 1 defenseman. Does Cody Glass make the team? I don't know. I really don't know. He's their number 1 prospect, and a lot of fans would love to see him play. I think he'll be given the chance. Why not? But who knows if he plays that whole season or not, and they burn a year of his contract. The other question would be, when is Shea Theodore getting signed? He's a restricted free agent right now. He is their future. He's only 23. He's the prize of that draft. One of the prizes. Obviously, you have Karlsson, but he's fantastic. He's going to be their number 1 defenseman. If they can sign him to a deal, I don't know if they're trying to do the bridge deal or if he's trying to say, look, I should be making Noah Hannafin money. I think you sign him to that kind of deal. I got to be honest with you. They've only had a year to look at him, but he was completely shutting down other teams in the playoffs. He and Schmidt were fantastic. Are Pacioretty and Stastny better than Neal and Perron? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Pacioretty is much better than James Neal, and Stastny is much better than Perron. Perron had a great season for Vegas, don't get me wrong, but he was scratched in the playoffs a few times. There's clearly something going on there, and Stastny is just a much better player overall. He had some injury problems in the past, so if he can stay healthy, that's going to be the key thing. But also, Perron had injury problems in the past as well, so who knows? Pacioretty's going to rebound this year. He had almost 40 goals a couple seasons ago, several 30-goal campaigns. I honestly look to see him getting 30 goals again this year. He's probably going to be playing with Stastny. I don't see them breaking up that line of Marchessault, Karlsson, and Smith anytime soon. They're stacked. Their power play is going to be stacked. Their top six is going to be stacked. Their bottom six is going to be stacked. Their defense is the thing that you kind of question, because they don't have that true number one defenseman. I think Theodore is their best defenseman right now, with Schmidt being out. They signed Nick Holden, but after watching him in Boston and New York, he's clearly not a savior at all. How far does this team go? We mentioned earlier that basically the West, it's going to be Nashville, Winnipeg, San Jose, and Vegas. San Jose just made a huge splash, and they look like more of a cup contender than Vegas. They really do. Defensively, they look better. Offensively, I don't know. I think Vegas has the deeper offensive core for the top two lines, but I think San Jose has a better bottom six. I think San Jose has a better defense. I think Vegas has better goaltending. I think Vegas has a better coach. So, who knows? In my opinion, I think they go either back to the Cup or they go back to the Western Conference Finals. Winnipeg got worse this season, and Nashville's still the same. So it could be Vegas versus Nashville in the Western Conference Finals. So that's going to wrap up our first podcast. I think it went pretty okay for the first one. Obviously, there's going to be some improvements, but I'm really glad you were here. I do have a Patreon page, which you can find by just going on Google and typing in Bench Boss Podcast at Patreon, or just searching on Patreon itself. I don't know why I didn't just say that in the first place. If you have any questions for me at all, feel free to just post them on Twitter. Give me any feedback you want. I'll be posting these on YouTube for a while. A lot of podcasting sites cost money, and I'm not doing that right now. If I start to build a following, then sure, I'll put it on more platforms. But for right now, we're going to keep it on YouTube. I'm going to come out with another podcast by the end of this week, kind of summing up the Atlantic Division, Central Division, and the Metropolitan Division, and try to get the rest of that down. And then I'm going to go over a, before the season starts, kind of predictions thing, where I'll predict who makes the playoffs, who wins each award, and just try to sum up everything before the regular season actually starts. So thank you very much for listening, and have a good day.